Hello and welcome, everybody. I am here today with Dr. Nikki Lane, who is an interdisciplinary scholar trained as a cultural and linguistic anthropologist, working along the edges of academia, making contemporary critical theory accessible using common sense, everyday language that anyone can understand. Dr. Lane is an assistant professor at Duke University and is an advisor for DiVerity. We're talking about intersectionality, ethical considerations in DEI, and how we engage with one another. I know it is also the day after voting day, so I hope that everybody got out there and voted. And I guess we will see how that all went later today. So one of the things we're talking about today is intersectionality, right? So today in 2022, there are a lot of people who are familiar with the term, or at least they think they are. And there's been much discussion on Kimberlé Crenshaw's, or Dr. Kimberlé Crenshaw's meaning in coining the term in 1989, how activists interested in racial or social equity have understood the term, and how some are responding to the ways that activists themselves use the term. So, Dr. Lane, in our discussion leading up to this episode, you mentioned that it's interesting to think about intersectionality in corporate context, specifically that quote unquote intersectionality is a good word to describe what people are after, but that isn't exactly what's meant by academics or activists. So, could you say more about that?
Yeah, I can say briefly that, one of the most interesting things about the term showing up in kind of these corporate spaces is that Crenshaw coins the term out of legal scholarship, right? She's talking about this in the context of legal systems, right? The idea that it's very difficult to sue someone for racial discrimination and gender discrimination at the same time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, in some ways, intersectionality comes up because, one of some of the examples that Crenshaw is using is it's people trying to sue the companies they work for.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? And so to think then about corporations or companies bringing intersectionality in and trying to think about what it means is really quite interesting. I mean, I don't know if that's what she would have thought would have been possible, or if that's even, if that's something that it's just interesting, right? And it's very interesting to see. It's interesting also to see how the term intersectionality can show up in these corporate spaces, but these spaces are often very hostile at the same time to Black women.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
so for me, part of it is also like these are some of the exact places that have been hostile towards the people who bring this term to you, right? The Black feminist thinkers and scholars and activists who've been working with this term are often excluded from these very places and spaces. So I think it's really interesting in a lot of ways, but those are the two that I think are perhaps at the top of my list.
So, what do you make of kind of the way that the general public has kind of run with the term?
I mean, I think that that's to be expected. I think that happens oftentimes with things that are being discussed in academic spaces. They eventually make them their way out into the general public. It can happen in a number of different ways. Either someone within the context of academia writes a book that galvanizes a public audience in a particular kind of way. So you might see it show up in that way. But also, I mean, eh, there's also this way that it travels with Black women who themselves have become quite famous, right? Kimberlé
Mm-hmm.
Crenshaw becomes a really important public figure. And so you hear her voice, you can hear her talking about intersectionality. You can type intersectionality and Kimberlé Crenshaw's name in YouTube and watch her give a talk about it.
Yeah.
So it's very easy to access intersectionality in a way that, at least for me, is really exciting to see, because I think the scholarship and the work that we do in the classrooms and the things that we do in the scholarship that we produce in academia should be in the public. It should be a part of public discourse. We should be thinking with the people who we're studying with. But what that also means is that the full context, right, where I might be able to teach intersectionality over the course of 2 to 3 weeks to my students with prep time and, you know, deep thought and critical thinking and other kinds of ways of getting them acclimated to the concept. Those are things that are very difficult to sometimes do in public spaces.
Yeah.
And so what happens is the public gets this term and they get it in a very specific, almost some might say watered down way that doesn't really allow them to access the full complexity of what the term means or the term in relationship to Black feminist thinkers. Instead,
Hmm.
they see intersectionality and they think of Kimberlé Crenshaw, and they sometimes do this thing where they think of all Black feminist theory or all Black feminist scholarship as those two things. Those two.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. Like, so one of the things that we can't kind of wave away is we live in an increasingly complex world, and biologically, our processing power hasn't increased at all, and we're still just somehow supposed to get used to drinking from the fire hose, right? And it's like, like to your point, when I learned about social identity theory in grad school, like it took me a while to wrap my head around the concept. But now
Right.
that the public's kind of gotten a hold of it, it's like, oh, this is just this divisive thing and like just dismissed out of hand. And it's like, no, there's a lot more to this. And this actually explains a lot of what we're experiencing. And
Right.
I'm aware that I'm sounding like a giant nerd to you. And you're like looking at me weird. And it's like, this whole thing.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, I've spent the better part of a decade or so studying Black feminist theory, and I understand intersectionality as one of many ways that Black feminist thinkers, Black queer theorists have worked with uh, systems of oppression, the way power works, and how those things are related to one another. So intersectionality is one of many things in my toolkit for understanding how things are related to one another, how race, gender, sex, class, and how those things are related. And when I think of intersectionality specifically, I tend to think about discrimination and oppression. So I
Hmm.
tend to think about how racism, sexism, heterosexism are interrelated to one
Hmm.
another.
Hmm.
So I don't so it's, so when you're talking about intersectionality, what people sometimes do is they talk about it in the same language that they're used to, which is usually like identity politics, right? They're
Yeah.
thinking about it in very specific terms of identity.
Hmm.
And I'm like, I don't really think that's what Crenshaw was talking about. I mean, maybe she was. We could ask her,
Yeah,
but I
she's
think
still
this is
alive.
the point. But this is the thing. This is the part of like what happens in academia, right? We argue.
Hmm.
We do not all agree
Yeah.
whether or not it's an explanatory term to discuss identity or if it's an explanatory term to discuss oppression or discrimination. We are not all on the same page.
Yeah.
So I think it's also important to understand that sometimes what happens is, you get these terms or you get these phrases out of academia, but the complexity, even of how they are discussed within or among the people who are using it, that complexity gets lost too.
That's absolutely true. And for those who are tuning in, if you never become familiar with how smack is talked in academic circles, let me tell you, it can be devastating.
Oh,
Like
people get
people
ugly. People
throw
get
down.
nasty. Yeah, no, it's throwdowns. It's a whole paper reading somebody for filth. It's absolutely brilliant. Some of my like, beef is great when it's coming out. It's like a 20-page article of just straight up beef. It's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Um, but it's true, right? We argue, we have conversations about it. We sit around at academic conferences disagreeing with one another, right?
Hmm.
These are things that we do. And the reason we do it is because it actually moves the scholarship forward.
Yeah.
Like you have to have critical debate and critical conversations in order to find something new.
Hmm.
And so I think even the practice, right, of being in conversation with people who agree with you partly and not is something that I try to teach my students how to do.
Yeah.
But the complexity of even trying to do that in a public forum, in a public space can be really difficult to try to do. How do you hold on to disagreement and still know that y'all are still working towards the same thing?
Right. And so my background is in conflict resolution with a focus on productive conflict. And this is definitely one expression, right? Scientific rigor is absolutely productive conflict. And it's something like the term intersectionality escapes from the ivory tower into the mainstream, but none of that productive conflict and that rigor comes with it. And that I see as a big problem, like not just for that one term, but in so many aspects of our lives, because it's what helps us to actually understand what like these deeper, more complex issues. So I'll pivot to the audience real quick. So how do you explain intersectionality to those unfamiliar or to who think they are familiar with the term? So we'll wait for
Oh,
some of those. Please tell me more.
I pull out a PowerPoint. I'd be like, sit down and pull out my PowerPoint. No, but I will say this. I do. I mean, I teach intersectionality when I teach Black feminist theory, and I teach things related to it. And I do it in a couple of different ways. And I usually do it depending on what I need my students to be able to do at the end, right? If I need them to be able to do a thing that we call in Black feminist theory intersectional analysis, then I teach them intersectionality in a way that they can perform or conduct a particular kind of analysis.
Yeah.
Right. So I teach it in a way that in ways that are sensitive to how it needs to be operationalized in some way. But I think, I mean, at least when I'm hearing this question, I think someone might want me to give them like a one or two sentence answer to it. And the truth is I don't do that. You know, if somebody wants to know what intersectionality is, I'd be like, okay, you want to understand intersectionality? Well, then you need to understand that Black women have been doing this work for a long time. Sure. All right. I go back to Ida B. Wells Barnett. In 1892, she writes this pamphlet called Southern Horrors, Lynch Laws in All Its Phases. She writes this essay about lynching, and she talks about the different positions of Black men and white women and Black women in the context of lynching in the United States. She teases out, right, the specificity of their experiences of this one kind of phenomenon. That is doing intersectionality. Yeah. And I think it's one of the most brilliant pieces of writing I've read in a long time, ever, right? Written in 1892. Wow. And if you go back and look at some of Ida B. Wells's writing in Southern Horrors, it reads like it could be some really A1 Twitter threads. Like I would love to just start an Ida B. Wells Barnett Twitter account just so I can anyway, but what she does is she analyzes race, gender, and sexuality and region all at the same time. Wow. Right. And that's what she's able to do. That's what we call, that's the thing. That's doing the thing. That's making race, gender, sexuality important all at the same time. Right. And also differentiating the ways that they affect people differently based on their social location. So I think so I would start there. That's 1892, and she's not calling it intersectionality. That would happen 100 years later, right? But then you have someone like, Anna Julia Cooper, who writes this essay, who writes this book, A Voice from the South, also in 1892. Wow. And she says this thing that's really important. She says, only Black women can say, when and where I enter, the whole Negro race can come with me. So what she's saying is that those at the very bottom of these particular kinds of social structures, if they can get in, then everybody above them or slightly above them can also get in too, right? If you address the needs of the lowest, then everybody else can get in too, just by the very nature of the lowest being accounted for. When Kimberlé Crenshaw writes her essay in 1989, Demarginalizing the Center, she gives us a couple different metaphors for thinking about intersectionality. She gives us an intersection, like a literal intersection, right, cross streets, and then that moment in the middle, the injury occurs, and you can't really tell if it's because this street, folks coming, but you can't really tell at that moment. But she also gives us another metaphor to think about intersectionality, and that's a basement, where at the bottom of that basement is all the people who are multiply disadvantaged for multiple different reasons. And at the top, in the upper room, are those who experience no forms of discrimination. Yeah. On the shoulders of those who are at the very bottom are those who can say, but for one thing, they too could be in that upper room. One
Yeah.
thing, they too can be in the upper room. And so Anna Julia Cooper literally did that in 1892. So, and then I would talk about Frances Beale, who writes this essay in 1970 called Double Jeopardy, where she's thinking about the very specific condition of being a Black woman, being a Black activist, and how Black women are experiencing patriarchy at the hands primarily of Black men, but also white men, and they're experiencing white supremacy at the same time.
Yeah.
So Black women end up in a very peculiar kind of position in society, and what she calls it is double jeopardy. 1988, Deborah King writes an essay. That's a year before intersectionality is termed. She calls the phenomenon multiple jeopardy.
Yeah, I remember learning about that.
Okay, so that's 1988. A year later, intersectionality comes out. There's a reason. I mean, look, we don't talk about multiple jeopardy. We don't say multiple jeopardy, but we say intersectionality. It could have gone the other way.
Sure.
It just didn't. It didn't take off in the same way. But what I like to impress upon people is when I'm explaining intersectionality is that intersectionality is one way to describe a set of theoretical interventions that Black women have been making since the 1800s.
Yeah. So, I mean, thank you for walking us through that so quickly, because I think what's evident is there's so much behind the term. And when people kind of go off thinking they know what they're talking about, it's like it totally misses the mark. And then we end up in these spaces where we're actually not talking to each other, we're talking past each other, right? And each side ends up bewildered, right? It's like, what is happening? Like, I think I'm making sense, but as we know, you can proceed rationally from a faulty premise. And this is where science and social science, yes, that's real science too, comes in and says, hang on, what are our assumptions here? Let's check these things. Somebody check my head. Peers review me, right? And we don't have that in the public sphere, right? Because it just goes back and forth. This is what this is. Nuh-uh. And it's like that kiddie stuff all over again, right?
It's really hard to have dynamic conversations in public spaces, which is why I tend to shy away from it, because it's really some people do it with class and flair, and I'm always just so like, wow, how can you do that?
Yeah, right.
But the truth is like, just when people ask me questions like that where they want like a simple watered down answer, I simply choose not to provide it.
Yeah, that's a lot of DEI practitioners talk about like when people need to intervene, right? How to account to the bystander effect. However, there is another part of this too that often we can't really see until the moment has passed. Like maybe it's better not to engage at all. And sometimes I can feel like, oh, I'm just being a coward. I'm being a part of the problem. But this is part of the difficulty of navigating racism, because like sometimes we react and we bring a lot of stuff with us, right? And that's what people respond to rather than the content of what we're trying to get at, right? And frankly, not a lot of people have been trained or have much practice in dealing in healthy ways with criticism, right? Those defenses come up and then their emotions come up. And then again, what happens? Not a whole lot that's productive. So we got a couple comments coming in. Let's see. So Christina says, nice to see you again, Christina. Such an important point of defining our terms when we work with others so that we can assess if we are all on the same page. Oh yeah, absolutely. Quentin says, love when academics argue back and forth at each other in journal article form. Yes, and this can go on for years or even decades, I have to say. So many terms and concepts get watered down in that way. That's Quentin again. Tassine is chiming in. So important to remember that even people in pursuit of the same goals do not agree all the time. Yes, and this is why we have this experiment of democracy, right? It's hard to do that. So we're trying in our various ways to accomplish that equitably, and we don't always succeed. Quentin back again. I tend to start with Dr. Crenshaw's work and definition first. Depending on the audience, we either talk deeper about oppression or identity. There is no one sentence answer, to be honest. Yeah, that is definitely true. So we've been talking a little bit about the impact here, right? And of DEI, of social science and scientific scholarship in some respects, but there's also like this thread of ethics, right? So, I mean, if we're thinking about the ethical dimensions of DEI and social change, does that, in your mind, maybe have something to do with, people have a lot of expectation around what we're going to accomplish with DEI, but then there's also this kind of what happened? We had so much energy, and where did that all go?
Yeah, I think that I think the I think doing DEI work, as especially as someone who also studies race, gender, sexuality at the same time, I find that I'm often asked to do things like, "Can you just come and talk to us about intersectionality?" And I'm like, "Well, why?" you know,
What are you gonna do?
what are you gonna do with it? Like what's the end goal? And I actually think that that's an important kind of question to prompt the people who we work for on. Like, they may not know that they really do need to think critically about why they want to bring this in. Are you just bringing it in because you just want people to know this term that you learned that one time when you were at dinner with somebody and y'all were
Yeah,
talking about it because they saw that podcast that one time and they saw that, like, is
yeah,
that it? Or is there something that you think that this can do for the people who you work for? Is there something that y'all see as a need? Is there something at work or at play that you want this term to be in circulation with the people who you work with or for, to some specific end, right? Um, and so to me, I think there needs to be some kind of like there needs to be like an impulse to be ethical in that way, to think about why you want to do these things. And whether or not that actually shifts or changes the culture, I don't know.
yeah.
But I do think that there's a way that we can be present as people who are doing this work, to be the folks to ask, like, why do you want me to come here? I mean, I'll come because you're paying me money, but also, why do you want me to talk about this thing specifically?
Yeah,
What's the utility here? Because for me, I mean, I think all of us take our own forms of Hippocratic oaths, right?
sure.
In relationship to DEI, we don't want to do any harm. I don't want to
Mhm.
go there and do harm,
Yeah.
especially importantly, at least for me, to the Black women who are working there. I don't want to come here, bring this term in, and then have y'all using this term all wrong
Right, yeah.
at the next meeting, and then she has to sit there and not be spoken to at all, and
Mhm.
have her ideas not brought to the fore. But y'all know about intersectionality now, so y'all feel like y'all know stuff. So
Yay.
that to me is really important, right? Bringing things in, is it just so that people can have a particular kind of vocabulary so they can perform knowledge, or is it because they want to actually do something different?
Yeah, because there's a lot of things that we can do, like, you were talking to us before, like, before the term intersectionality was even coined, people were calling the same thing different things, or maybe they didn't even have a specific name for it. Sure, like, if we have a name for something, then it's easier to talk about, but it doesn't necessarily make it easier to do, right? And it's like, if the point is doing, then knowing the name of it, who cares, frankly? Just do
You
the
need to
thing.
do it. Like, you need those folks. I mean, and that's the thing. Like, it's interesting to think about like I said, I don't know what intersectionality does in the context of the corporation or the company, right? What does it
Mhm.
do? I don't know. I don't even know if it belongs there, right? And
Yeah,
I think that um I don't think it belongs there if it's going to be used against Black folks.
right, for one.
You see what I'm saying? Like, I don't know if that's it, like that to me seems a little like suspicious. But I sometimes go into these places where, they have a bunch of business resource groups, right? And like, part of what they're interested, and this is important to say, like, I've worked with people who I think are really trying to do something different, right? Like, they really want to be different. They really want to be ethical. And they're genuinely interested in doing better. And they want their organizations to be better, and they want them to be more accountable, and they want that, like, this is what they brought me there for, right? This is what they want. And so they just don't know how to do it. And so they'll say something like intersectionality, and they think that it's like sexy and other people are doing it, and it seems like a new word to throw in the mix, and it might get more people at the event. But the truth is that once you throw it in the mix, it becomes really difficult to ignore all the ways that your company might not be able to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's certainly true. And I mean, not for nothing here, but like this is also entering, like it's being weaponized at the political level in political discourse, right? And in that way, it's, yes, often weaponized against Black people, but also against anybody else, right? And it's like, now it's even harder to do the thing, which is simply to vote for the things that improve our lot in life. That's what voting's for. And yet we've all, we're continuing under this paradigm where again and again people are being misled by fancy language, new terms, new outrages, and for what? Right.
It doesn't really get at the heart of what what we're doing or what we're trying to do. But I think, in some ways there's this I think that in some ways there could be a really practical use of doing, at least in the context of like a company or corporation, doing a thing that I often teach my students to do, around what I call like if you want to do an intersectional analysis, these are the three things you need to do, right? And I tell them that you need to first ask primarily, which group of people are you talking about? Which women? Which men are you talking about? Which Black people? Which disabled folks are you talking about? Right? There's a very practical way to actualize this, right? You can just ask which folks you're talking about, right? Rather than assuming that this block of people are all the same, but trying to think across the difference, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think what sometimes can happen is also in political discourse is we like to lump everybody together, and we
Yeah.
assume that everyone has the same needs, desires, wants, even within that particular block or in that particular group. I don't think that's true. And I think if you ask enough people, you'll notice that, oh, there's gradations, there's ways that people come to these things in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's, in my opinion, part of what an intersectional approach can like offer us is like, if you're not approaching lumps or groups of people in this way where you think like, oh, all X people want this particular thing and therefore they'll want to do it this way. Well, maybe, but maybe not,
Yeah.
like, we have to be able to pivot and think about the specificities of people, but also know that those things may be linked to things like their socioeconomic status. It might be linked to their gender. It might be it might be, but sometimes it's just idiosyncratic.
So if I hear what you're saying correctly, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like if we want to get better at serving the general public, like everybody or as many people as possible, then we really have to drill down to a much finer level of detail so that we can really see what's going on. Because we make a lot of assumptions when we're just lumping people together. Is that fair?
There it is. There it is.
So we are running out of time here, but do you have any kind of parting thoughts for people tuning in as you and I know, day in and day out, the world is just getting more complex, right? There's more things that are dog whistles and distractions, and how do we deal with that?
If I had to sum things up, I would say that I think it's really important to engage in some serious self-study about
Hmm.
these terms that come out, these new things that come out. And you can do what I do, which is to try to put a little bit of critical distance between yourself and the thing. I study pop culture, so I study the stuff that's happening right now all the time.
Hmm.
And yet I'm still sensitive to immediately commenting on something. You'll almost never see me watch something or see something on TV and immediately have a thought piece that comes out afterwards, 6 hours after it came out.
Right.
You know what I mean? That doesn't allow you to sit with a thing, to study a thing, to go back and watch that clip again. Does that clip sound like it was spliced? Does that sound like a whole sentence someone would say? Where's the full clip? Where's the, like, if you say you're interested in a thing, then do the work to actually figure out the thing. So
Yeah.
to me, I'm always very much a fan of doing self-study that does not require a PhD. That just requires an internet connection and a willingness to sit with a thing and put some distance between what other folks are saying and how you might actually be able to approach that thing.
Right. And, to bring up something you were saying earlier, I highly doubt that Ida B. Wells was out there just releasing her thoughts into the ether immediately after witnessing all that. She must have sat with that and really combed through her thoughts, reflected on how she felt about it and how she wanted to say it. And
Exactly. You can't get that. You can't get her level of analysis without sitting. She sat with. She must have been surrounded by newspaper clippings because the
yeah,
project is about. She looks at the way the news talks about lynching, and it's absolutely brilliant. You can't do that kind of work without just sitting there for a really long time and seeing and noticing the patterns.
yeah.
So to me, it's all about pattern recognition. Humans are very good at that. But if we don't give ourselves enough time to actually sit with things, then we won't be able to recognize the patterns.
100%. If you're interested in finding out more about what Dr. Lane is up to, please go visit her website at www.thedrlane.com. And you can also find her on Instagram at the Dr. Lane or on Facebook at the same handle. Dr. Lane, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a real pleasure. I really wish we had more time, but perhaps we can do a part 2 or something
Part
another time.
two. Part two. All
All
right,
right.
y'all.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.